Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Testing. Okay. All right. Okay. Well, thank you. Welcome back. I hope everybody had good lunch. That's the receiver. All right. So welcome back from lunch. I hope everybody had a tasty lunch. Did anybody have anything particularly tasty? Restaurant we don't know about that we could go to? Anyway. Okay. All right. So the next section of presentations is going to be some presentations about the software. And so I'm going to be presenting about the client release, about client updates. The client release, the way we've organized things is that for the server and for the client, there's a release manager for each of them, and they're in charge of coordinating, getting a formal release out the door, getting it tested, making sure it's stable, communicating it out to everyone, getting a list of all the fixes in it, all it features, all that kind of stuff. The release manager for the client is David Anderson, a job that he's been doing for a long time. Release managers are supported for the client by a series of so-called build masters, which largely just comes down to different people work on different parts of the application. So there's some people that manage the Linux distribution and get the Debian and EPEL repositories updated. The Android client is kind of a pain to build, and so there's other people that do that. And then the Windows and the Mac. And so we have build masters for each of those, and they help David do the release. The way the release process is, the ideal version of the release process is documented at the BOINC policy. This is where we try to keep anything we've kind of formalized into a process. There's not a lot there, but it at least tries to tell you how we do things. Like our pull and merge strategy is kept in the BOINC policy also, so that everybody knows, okay, if I want to add code, how do I do that? And all that documentation is there, and linked to from the contributing document in the main repository. So a release starts with the release manager saying, hey, I'm going to do a release. Does anybody have anything they were trying to get into it? And they wait a few days and see what else comes out. If anybody says, yeah, I've got this feature I'm trying to get in there, wait for that to get done. Once those are in, they go ahead and cut a release branch, and then tell the build masters to create the version of the client for those. And they make the release manager then makes those builds available, and notifies the alpha testers that it's ready to be tested. The alpha testing is something that if you want to help and you don't know how you can plug in, there's always a need for alpha testers. There's a set of standard use cases that need to be tested across all the different platforms, testing various exciting things like attaching to a project, detaching from a project, doing an update, canceling a task, all the kind of things that our volunteers do. These need to be done. And so there's a link in my presentation to the alpha testing website if you're interested. As bugs are identified, as critical bugs are identified, they're documented and tracked and fixed by the contributors. New builds are created, new round of testing, and once there's no more critical bugs, it's released. So pretty standard release management. Since the last workshop, one release came out, 7.14. It went to only a .2 version right now. It was released in October of last year. And so some of the major things that happened with this one is that this is the first release that had been updated. I think the previous version was 7.4, which is like 5 years earlier. One of the things I talked about yesterday was a lot of the work we're doing to, since the transition from the core development team to the community-based models, trying to repair these release processes and whatnot. And so getting the Linux client in the repositories updated is, some of that, the community is starting to pick up the work. And as far as features go, the most significant one was the auto attach mechanism. So I don't know if you are aware of this, but if the project website has updated to the latest release of the code and a new volunteer goes to download the client, you'll register first and then you'll download the client. And it will actually then wind up containing extra characters in the file name that are passed to the installation so that when it starts up, it actually identifies the project that it was downloaded via and a not, so a long string of characters, and it will automatically attach you to that project. So you don't get the pick a project dialog. You actually just start it up, and it will automatically attach you to the client. This used to be done via a mechanism using cookies, but that relied on actually searching through for Firefox, Chrome, doing all sorts of things that scream security violation and stuff that was kind of ugly. And the other advantage of this new auto attach mechanism is that it also works on Mac now as well. So both the Windows and the Mac clients now do this auto attach. The work on that was started by Ron Walton a year and a half ago or so, I think 2.5 years ago. I don't know. And then David Anderson finished it up last summer. And then, of course, as always, there were multiple bug fixes. You can see the release page for more details. Upcoming is the 7.16 release. This largely contains just a lot of fixes. I was just going back through all of the changelog, which is a little tedious, so I probably missed a few things. But there were a lot of various UI fixes and other fixes in the client. And so it's really more of an accumulation of minor fixes going into this release. I'm not aware of any major new features. But one of the things that's going to happen with this is that a lot of work has been done around rebuilding the Android build environment and updating the API versions using the latest SDK versions and a few UI issues on it, but largely just getting it back into a buildable, stable state. And so this will be released as part of the 7.16 release. And so at that point, we'll have 7.16 releases across all 4 platforms again, which will be, a good thing to have. It also has a new version of VirtualBox, but that's always been updated, so every release always brings a new version of VirtualBox. So who produces releases? The release managers, build masters, alpha testers, all the volunteers who actually speak up and report bugs, help track them down. Sometimes they occur in very unusual situations, and so when volunteers are willing to do the extra work necessary to figure out what's causing the bug, that can be very, very helpful. And of course, all the contributors who help fix it. I took a look at all of the people who had committed to code to the repository since the 7.14 release. Some of this is, in fact, for things like some of the DevOps that we do and some of the server code. But I did think it was really nice to see that there have been 27 contributors who had 27 different people who had contributed code to the repository since then, because this really reflects that we're making progress on making it possible for people to contribute to the code base and start building a wider set of contributors, and that will help us in the long run. I bolded everybody who I was aware was at the workshop. If I didn't bold you, I apologize. But we have some nice representation from that group. Oh, wow, I deleted a slide. Okay. So I have one extra slide which says contributors are not just developers, and I want to keep reiterating this. Like, developers is like GitHub has easy ways to pull metrics and other ways to do things, and so it's really, really nice. But there's all the people like, I guess Richard's actually committed some code too, but Richard is always out helping volunteers. He's always floating up issues reported in project forums and getting that data back to GitHub so we're able to be aware of it. And this type of work is extremely important for the ongoing success of the project. And so everybody who participates in, translation files and supporting users are all doing the alpha testing. I didn't have them on that list on the previous page, but they are equally important to the success of the client release. So that is the client release update in short. Questions? So becoming a contributor just means that you've done something to support the BOINC platform. There's nothing anybody has to do it. I think, so if you go to the main BOINC repository, you will see a document. If I can find the browser. You deleted the browser? Thanks. So BOINC GitHub, if I can spell, is usually all it takes, and that'll pull you up to the main BOINC repository. And when this blazingly fast computer uploads it, down here somewhere is a file called contributing. I think it's actually even linked to here. So it's down at the bottom. There's always the README that the projects have, and so you can, this is information on how, if you want to be a translator, how you can help translate, and this includes both the client and the server. You want to make a project, attend Keith's call tomorrow, and if that's not good enough, you can go to the wiki. And then it's this one, yeah. That wasn't actually where I thought the link was going to take me, so that's why I was hesitating on that. So this links over to the policy like I was talking about. And if you go down here, you can see all of our development processes described. This is actually a little more focused on making code contributions to the platform. And so this is where I will say that we have work to do in terms of onboarding different types of people. All this content that's in GitHub is really more focused on the developers who are contributing, because I don't see any links for, if you want to be an alpha tester. But if you go to the main BOINC website, I think it has additional information there. Oh, that's right, in my presentation, so I'd go there, yeah. Oh, yeah. This should have, like, if there are IT guys and they want to do development, then the stuff that's on GitHub is where to go. And it has all the documentation about how to open a pull request and where the style guidelines are, all that kind of good stuff. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. The mailing list, the alpha testing. Well, that's why I also need to find the, see, all that stuff actually technically belongs in the contributing.md file. And I was trying to decide how much time I was going to spend over everybody's lives looking for it. But there it is. All right. So this is the file that typically in a open source project, well, on GitHub, stores it. So it has the, so this is the much better one. So it's helping translate, how to report a bug, supporting enhancements, how to do a pull request, which actually these instructions slightly contrast with the other instructions. Not in a meaningful way, though. So we have work to do to standardize our documents, make it consistent across things, but that's generally where you go to look. And so, Angela. Okay, so the question was about the new Android version. Does it update the OS level and compliance with the latest APIs? And then the second question was, will it require more RAM? So in answer to the first question, yes, that's one of the big things, is it's making it compliant. It's taken out some of the old permissions that don't exist anymore, added the new ones in that exist, correcting a lot of the API changes that have occurred over time, changing the build configuration so that it says, I support these versions, and it updates all of that type of stuff. And then there are a few UI changes. The answer to your second question is that the memory usage on Android is not very large in comparison to the research applications. And so I don't know if this particular build is going to use more or less memory for BOINC itself, but really the memory configuration is about the research applications running, and that will remain the same because those won't be rebuilt because those are downloaded from the project websites. Yes, and who is in this room that's most tied to that? Because I don't do much of it. It's like Christian, Vitaly. Who else is deeply involved in that? I'm looking back at Tristan and Ritas, and all right. So yes, that's all in our repository. We're doing Coverity scans. We're doing Travis CI builds. So whenever you make a pull request, it will actually build on, I think, all platforms except Android. So we'll do a Mac build, a Linux build, and a Windows build to verify that it at least still builds. We have a smidge of integration testing for the server where it will actually build the full project and create a new project and then register a user and validate that the user actually gets entered in the database and some basic stuff. And so we're starting to do more work around that. Over the last year, there's been some work on doing test-driven development using the Google test framework for C. So we're starting to get some cases there. So our code coverage has gone from 0 now up to, I guess it's like, I think it says usually 6%. So it's not an impressive number, but it's always you start somewhere and you start improving from there. You know, we've stopped digging and we're starting to climb the hill. So that's progress. So, but all of that is in the code base, so in the same repository, so you can look at it there. And then if you do have questions on all of that, post to BOINC Dev, and the guys who work on it mostly they're very good at responding. Well, one of them just had twins, so he might not be as good anymore. But other questions? All right, thank you. Oh, I should delete that.
Thank you. Okay. So I'm going to talk about a bit about the BOINC server relays. So what is a server relays? It's a unique version that identifies the state of the server relays. And it's created using the server relays process. It's identified by measure.minor.relays, where measure version indicates significant and fundamental change. Minor version indicates a relays, and odd numbers are test relays. Relays version instead indicates bug fix. It provides documentation about features. It has release notes, and version history. And it may contain some announcements. Why are we using server relays? Mainly to identify the state of deployed software, what features, bug have been applied, bug fixes, the state of the server on discovering an issue. Then we change management. We can see what has changed since the previous version, which feature and bug fixes will be provided. And it's also important for security related issues. Then we have some quality assurance, where the software has been through a Q&A process, and the version is running these projects. So you can see which projects are running a specific version of the server. How is the server released? The release manager manages the release process. He is responsible for the communication and coordination. He announces the intention to make a new release, and he requests input from the community on features and fixes that should be included. And he also works with anyone who responds to determine if that work will be included or not. The release manager also addresses concerns that are raised as the work progresses. He also coordinates the testing of the server and identifies which bugs will be fixed and which will be deferred to a future release. He also, the release branch also is created once all the work is available in the master branch. And the release branch is considered feature frozen. So only bug fixes designated by the release manager will be merged. The build and test cycle. The release manager increments the tag version number. Then the version history is updated. And the release manager emails the BOINC development and the BOINC project mailing lists, announcing the availability of a new release candidate. Testers then conduct testing and record bugs found, and designate also those that need to be fixed and those that can be postponed for a future release. And this is repeated until all designated bugs have been fixed. The server release, the general acceptance is once there are no bugs outstanding for the release, then the minor version is incremented to indicate a production release, and there will be a consensus vote of the projects to declare the release as generally available. Then there is the post-release management, when the release manager remains engaged for the lifetime of the branch, and he continues to track bug reports. He also leads the community with prioritizing these bugs. He determines if they need to be fixed in the current release or not, and then he pushes out a new release if needed. When will the server be released? When required. We have the first cycle of the release that, for example, addresses the first version release and the GDPR. Then we have the branched version November 8, 2018, released version 1.0.3 on 10 December 2018, and the next minor release in March 14, 2019, with some GPU fixes. Then we have the second cycle that addresses some code checkpoints and a call for any other issues feature, if there are any. So the conclusion: the version server releases are important for good service management. The version server releases are now available, and they are the result of the server release process. They are led by the server release manager that coordinates and does the communication. It's an initial Q&A process that can be improved over the time, and it's also a call for input for the next server release. Any questions?
We had one also. No, we have to figure out what it is. But it's nice to target out.
I'll be right.
We all know there are
Or like if I put up.
Okay, up next is Giuseppe.
Did I say that?
Yes. Mike, you here? Let's just put some in your pocket.
Okay, thank you.
This just clips out in your pocket.
Okay. Okay, hi everyone. My name is Giuseppe Aceto, and I'm a service designer and researcher based in Italy. First of all, I want to thank Work Community Grid and BOINC to give me the opportunity to share my thoughts and ideas here with you. As you can see, I'm currently the lead designer at Digital Mosaic, an Italian company that works with VR technology. And I'm founder of Rebica Research and Design Lab for Culture and Education. For the University of Trento, I've made research about the ethical impact of information technology applied to no-profit and cultural environment. And during my last years, I've designed service for some of the most important brands in Italy, with which I work on problems that we can find also in BOINC community. For example, user retention, and I think that the know-how I have acquired might be useful in BOINC's context. Okay, what I don't do. My speech will be a little bit different from what you see and hear until now. That's because I'm not a technician, neither a scientist or an IT expert. My experience with BOINC is as a volunteer since 2014, and based on my work and passion about this project, I want to share some ideas that I hope you will find interesting. Okay, sorry, do you know BOINC? In these 5 years of volunteer and passionate about BOINC project, I've questioned myself if there are better ways to communicate and expand the brand reputation of BOINC itself. Based on my experience with different profit and non-profit organizations, I've involved different people from my contact to investigate the level of knowledge of BOINC project to find on what the improvement would be lead to involve more users. As emerged several times in yesterday's speech and debate, I'm happy to see that we are on the same wavelength. On this, my research has underlined the two main aspects about BOINC that can be hostable to the user are mainly two. The first is the project credibility. The credibility of the project and the main goal that doesn't emerge from the digital identity and communication of BOINC is not clear in every context. I start from this awareness to understand how to overcome this problem. Let's talk a little bit about my job as a designer researcher. For those who doesn't know the work of every designer, the work is mainly focused to understand the needs of user. Remember the example about the bridge at the beginning of yesterday's design service session? The approach is user-centered, and it involves the use of survey, co-design, session, and other tools to understand people behavior and expectation. The goal, of course, is to increase the appeal of BOINC project for potential users. And to do so, we can start with some maths. Work Community, for example, have 700,000 members and 5 million devices. But based on Forrester research from 2013, the PC in the world are more or less 2 billion. We can say there is room for improvement. Okay, 2 billion is a number that is impossible to reach. But this is only a reference that we can say there is room for improvement. And so, as a designer, what is my challenge? Is to improve digital identity. And to do this, we need to understand what are the obstacles to involve even more people. And based on the analysis of the project, the first challenge is to improve the credibility by working on the digital identity as to be modern, recognizable, inclusive, and updated. Okay, here we are talking about digital identity, not about software or other user interface. And to understand how we can do this, I work on user duality. The user duality is made for volunteers, the part of the project that don't have computational power, like institution and single user. And the other side, the users, like research centers and university. The part of the project that need to elaborate data and people that help to develop project. So the next step is to understand the volunteers. Here, I'm focused not on institution, but single users. And to help me to understand single users that can be volunteers in the project, I'm working with proto-personas. Proto-personas is a little bit different to the personas that we are see yesterday. Proto-persona are archetypes. And the archetypes tell me that the people, the single volunteer, are motivated by personal interest, lifestyle, confidence with technology, and cultural level. And focusing again on what can represent and observe for a potential user, identify factors on which we don't have control, such as not being interested in this type of project, or not having a suitable technology tool, mobile-only user, while the factor on which we have room for maneuver represent the lack of knowledge of the project and the lack of understanding what BOINC value is. As the reference community is very extensive and generalist in order to answer these potential volunteers, and we must work on accessibility and inclusiveness of the project itself. I have developed a proposal that improves the digital identity of BOINC based on some principle compatible with the variety of potential of our community. Those principles are immediacy. When we talk about something to someone, we have a few seconds to capture his attention. Similarly, is this natural to reduce the step to have access to understand the BOINC service. The simplicity, the aspect of UX and UI is fundamental. It has to be simple to use and to understand for users with different levels of skills and digital culture. The value, as emerged yesterday of value intervention, communication the value of a no-profit project and whose ultimate goal is to improve the world and the society we live, and it's fundamental to be able to increase the number and the loyalty of volunteers, to make them perceive not only the value of the project, but the contribution of the individual to make things happen. Starting to the awareness, the first step I will take it work on a common visual language. By working on user interface for the first time, with the ultimate goal of creating a complete design system. So now we are talking about my purpose is to create a BOINC design system. And for who don't know what is a design system, is a series of components that can be reused in different combinations. It's a common language that is able to simplify future development work. And the design system is a group of rules, tools, and components that we can use for design website related to the project. Use this component to redesign mobile app and create maybe future iOS app. Or, for example, extension to browser. Or create simple website easily that talk about the project. And what I need to create a BOINC design system? My idea is to create a BOINC design team. If in the community there's people passionate to design or professional designer, we can create a team that work on design system. And with this team, start working on internal brainstorming. And then start a co-design with the community. And then share the document and components that can be useful for creating someone related to the project. Okay, this is all. I think the right approach to make things happen is to get involved in the first person. And the creation of a design team for BOINC represents the first step in order to improve the visibility and effectiveness of a project whose ultimate goal is to do good. Personally, I make myself available to start talking to all those interested in this type of project. If there are any questions, I'm available, and obviously you can also email me. Here you can see my contacts. Thank you.
Just make sure I understand. You're talking about building a design system.
Another word about the design system. Design system is a big group, and inside we can find style guide, for example, icons, but the design system is mainly a language, so we can talk about our values through icons, style guide, for example, a selection of image to use in website or in other contexts related to project. Yes.
I'm curious if you know other volunteers with that kind of interest. I can see a lot of value in doing this, but
Yes.
I have no idea where to begin in terms of identifying volunteers with that skill set.
So, sorry, I return to my first slide. I work in Ducati, Ferrari, and Lamborghini, and here I can find Ferrari and Lamborghini, and here I can find other designer that are interested to work with me to this project. And also to share their computational power to this project. Yes. Okay.
Do you have also any plan for designing the BOINC manager graphic using the
So the design system include components that can be useful for this purpose. But for now, the project is to create the rules and the tools to maybe redesign everything you want.
Well, I was going to ask from an organizational level, which probably is what there's the opportunity that like the PMC oversees the contributors, which are very much technical folk. And if I understand what you're saying correctly, is you're saying that to form a operating group
of designers who can then be, leading the effort in terms of producing the design and then incorporate it into the technical builds. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah, we'll be talking. That's a very nice offer. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Andy, in the back.
Great.
It's on. This clip.
Yeah, so if we could keep questions and points to the end, if that's okay, and then any discussion after this on this we can be made. Until the end. If that's okay? Yeah. No, I just rattle through it and then you can refer to the end. So no, it was good. Oh, yeah. Wait until the end, yeah.
Lots of graphics.
Particularly big.
Unfortunately, this machine is really fast. Can we ask you questions now, since we're waiting about your presentation?
Well, it should be uploading. I've got a passport and a picture of it where it says.
Great.
This is a question?
It's a demand. There's no question out of it, right?
It's 1231. I think 1231. That's what they say, but they don't know. It's kind of roughly 1231.
I don't have any access to this machine from over there when I was here.
She lost the internet. Go.
Yeah, it's gone.
So let's go through your phone.
I assume that's why it was called Oxford. That makes sense. Yeah, so as long as if it's your NAS, not completely locked the past.
Andy, for your next
Yeah, I tried that.
Oh, so now we're just.
I only 8 people.
like kicked me off for some reason, so which is very helpful. So I'm just connecting to my phone instead. Which is more stable for some reason.
We've got like a network.
Talking as well. Download. Okay, just go on with this. That's not helpful at all. Yeah, the IBM internet failed. It was like you were not connected at all. Yeah, no. Sometimes it comes in and out, and then it went out at the wrong time. So, but we're crunching along now. How big of a presentation do you have?
7 megabytes.
You've only got 2 minutes to speak.
Yeah. No, I know it's running out. That's why the question's got to be at the end.
What's up? Well, this is faster than what the IBM was. And questions are still at the end on that one.
Yeah.
Okay, part one.
Why is it? Okay.
Okay, let's see.
Fine. There's
17 pages.
17 pages. Yeah.
Okay, we're good to go. All right, sorry about the delay.
Fine. No. Okay. In a change from what's advertised, I've added a few more slides onto this, talking about the volunteer retention. So it's in two parts. The first part we're talking about the heating effects and power consumption of a study done on regarding a BOINC on desktop computer, and the second part will be about volunteer retention, some queries from the database. So we did a study looking at the heating effects and power consumption on a BOINC on desktop running on in an office environment, running BOINC. So we looked at both from a point of view of energy and from heat, and from the rise in temperature produced. So what we did was we took 2 rooms, two office in an office environment, each with the same number of desktop computers, and we looked at, one was a control room, one was a study room, and we measured the temperatures in these rooms. We then recorded the temperatures and removed the control from the study results. We also looked at the external temperatures and also removed that from the results from the study room. The results we got were that the maximum increase over the time period of the study was 0.65 degrees Celsius over the course of the study. And then in terms of power consumption, we did a similar thing where we took a baseline power consumption without BOINC running any simulations, and then looked at the power consumption with running BOINC working units, and deducted the two. And for that we had a power consumption per work unit of 426 watts per work unit, per 35 minute work unit. So. Joules. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Agree. Okay, so these are the number of work units calculated over the course of the study. These are the results from and these are the temperatures in the exemplar rooms. So this part is the external temperature, and this is days on the x-axis. These are the batches between the red and the green, and this is the room temperature in one room and temperature in the other room. So these are the raw results. And then when we did the subtraction, we got so this is temperature in Celsius, so it's 1, 2, 3, and these are batches. And you can see this is the trend. So the maximum it's getting up to 0.6 of a degree temperature in Celsius. So this is just a graphic of the energy consumed. So okay, so that's the first part of the presentation, and then we looked at in a separate study at a separate time looked at volunteer retention. So this was since the founding of climateprediction.net. This is the number of completed simulations which have been performed over that time. So you see it started off very, very low. Then we had the BBC experiment, which was this part here. And then this is the 2014 floods experiment. So these is results from last year. I recorded last year, so hence there's no 2019 results showing. So now, then looking at the number of new volunteers that signed up to the project over that per year. Again, you can see a slow rise, but then a peak when the BBC project. So this is a project which was done in conjunction with the BBC, and then of course there's a decrease in number of new volunteers. So on the y-axis, this is 250,000. So okay. Now, looking at the total number of time donated per year over the lifetime of CPDN, this is sort of a reasonable expectation of the amount of time donated. So this is total time donated in seconds, 1 to raise to the power of 10 to the 12. So this peak here represents the 2014 floods experiment. So this is saturation, really. This is how much the maximum amount of computation of the environment of people attached to the project can actually handle. So okay, moving on. So this was the results from this 2014 UK flood study, which was done pretty much after very close to the actual event. Now we can look at the number of volunteers that were signed up in that period. Now this is done in conjunction with the Guardian, and so the Guardian were publicising this at the time. So you can see that we had a peak of new volunteers signing up. So it does represent a effectiveness. So these were other media reports, actually based on the published results rather than the actual study. After the event. So there was a number of other articles. Now we look at how long new volunteers stay engaged. So this is number of volunteers on the y-axis, 120,000. And this is in terms of years. So you see there's a large peak here. And the average length of time a user is engaged with the project is 1 year and 11.5 months. All right. So now, if we look at that from the point of view of people who are actually engaged in the forum, it's very different. Now, where we see the that the average length of time engaged has increased up to 7 years, 5 months. However, the number of volunteers is much lower. This is 300 on the y-axis. So basically, if they interact with the forum, they stay more engaged with the project. So we can also look at the number of new volunteers who engage for a maximum of 1 week. There's no data here, I'm afraid, for this part, and that's decreasing with time as the years go by. So I don't know what conclusions you can draw from that. So these are the takeaways from this. So temperature increase of 0.65 in an office environment. The power consumed. David yesterday spoke about linking volunteers' contribution to papers in terms of engagement from volunteers. And if volunteers engage with the forum, they stay engaged with the project much longer. So, and news campaigns are effective for recruiting and retention of volunteers. So that's all. Okay. Very, very quick.
We
So,
already got questions out of it. How many days did you run the temperature?
God, it's on here actually. Back it backwards. Yeah. So this starts at 10th of May, and this goes down to the 7th of September. So yeah.
Beginning red and then green each time, and you can see actually that a lot of the change is independent of the function of the machine. And so you mean exactly whether that much or up. So in these periods, the machines in the study room took to the point. So in the periods between the red and the green lines, the machines in the study room were actually operating and running work units. Outside of these periods, so for every time from a green to a red, there is no work being done on those machines. They're being used as normal within the room that they're actually in by the members of staff of the commercial partner for their normal day jobs. And the same for the control room. And the control room and the study room had the same number of machines in them. So just
Thanks.
Outside of running.
yeah, so
But it's based on the outside temperature. What the outside temperatures are. So yeah. That's the driver, the outside temperature rather than BOINC. Okay.
I wanted to make a comment on your second to last bullet point. It's never been clear to me whether people who engage with forums stay with the project longer, or whether people who stay with the project longer are more likely to engage with the forum.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. But
So causation is not clear.
yeah. But forum's good though. That's the conclusion. Yeah.
Yeah, in some cases. It's still a small fraction of the total.
Yeah.
It would be
It's a
interesting
small
to see.
fraction. Yeah.
I haven't done this in a long time. It would be interesting to see the graph of the opposite, what fraction of people who've been around a certain number of years engage in the forum, as opposed to what fraction of people who engage in forums have been around.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess.
The subjective impression is very rare for somebody to engage in the forum after they
So the question was what we did to measure the power consumption of the machine. We had a device which was between the power socket and the machine, so that recorded the power consumption. Yeah.
What were the BOINC settings in terms of like optimizing for the
Okay.
percentage, force it to run out of
So the question was, what were the BOINC settings we used when we did this study? They were normal, and the idea was they were just generic. They were as you download it, those settings, because the idea was that it was a person actually using the machine during the daytime, and then it would run in the evening, or run when they're not, and when they're not using it, and the temperature. It was generic, yeah.
I've got some power measurements taken in a similar mechanism of the 20 watt meter in the wall socket, using a modern but sort of bog standard office machine, an office desktop machine. That machine was measured when idle, drawing 22 watts. That's just running the operating system. When running BOINC on the CPU only, 4-core machine, 4 work units, went up to 71 watts. When I added the GPU and all the trimmings as planned, I got a maximum consumption of 125 watts measured.
Okay.
So those are possibly
Yeah.
not a brilliant machine, not a sort of workstation, not to check over your users were using, but the figures are pretty mild for modern equipment.
Yeah. The example here was we were interested in the cost, the power, the actual money, the monetary amount it would cost to actually run these machines for the BOINC. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Modern buildings, everything that's being built on Berkeley campus now is required to have continuous power monitoring for the entire building. So it's interesting if you convince a department to switch over all their machines to BOINC at night to see what the total power cost, because every 400 watts you pump into the room is going to be a few hundred watts of cooling probably.
Yeah. Yeah.
There is no after hours.
Yeah, for those that are really properly after hours on that,
Yeah.
is there a way to access this data?
The question was,
Outreach stuff?
well, this presentation will be online, I think. So this presentation will be online, so that data can be.
Can you just take it and use it? The data itself. The actual data, the next data. Well, the graphs, basically.
Yeah.
So, one of your charts here, you got about 4,000 volts per project. There were how many people actually read those articles? What is the return?
So the question was, how many people read those articles, and from the number of volunteers. No, I'm afraid we have no figures from that. Yeah. Oh, does it? Okay. Okay, great. So maybe, yeah. So sorry. Okay. Is there any other questions? Or there was one question from over here, but he's gone. He's stepped out. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's it. Oh, hang on. Sorry, one more question. Last question. Yeah. 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 Absolutely. Well, that cost would be, so it's 35 minutes. So it was 426 watts over 35 minutes. So yeah, so that's kilowatts. You can so kilowatts wise, that would be, I don't know, 0.85 kilowatts per hour kWh. Yeah. I don't have that. Yeah, I'll have to refer back to the data. But this is, we're looking individual work. Yes, I think. Yeah, I'll have to go back to the data. So, yeah, cool. Anybody else? No? Okay. Great.
I just want to do one more call for John Heater. I don't think he's in here.
Bueller?
No. So Jonathan, he'll be up.
Did you upload a presentation?
Yeah, now we get crazy. How long is it? Not too long, I think. Okay. Yeah, it should be. I think it's that one with the big logo right there. One more up. Oh, it's this one. It's nice. Microphone. Oh my God, these things are fun.
We just have to teach Andy how to make it 9 gig presentation.
How big's mine?
Just like 270 kilobytes.
Simple bullet point.
It works.
All right, so I'm going to be talking about the open systems of science. I participate in the Gridcoin ecosystem. It's a cryptocurrency. It's a blockchain. It's a community that works with BOINC on top of BOINC. But I will say first, in response to what Patrick was saying about cryptocurrencies, the good things that do come from these things are the levels of passion of the people that participate in these systems are very, very high. We have a very active community. We have a Discord server, Slack server, Reddit threads. Reddit's like 4,000 people, 4.7. Our Twitter's like 14,000 people. Our Discord is almost constantly like 150 people. And we have 1,000 or some odd registered people who are on the Discord server, and we talk to each other. So if you want to talk about whether or not forums keep people engaged, the Discord server alone keeps people engaged. It's really cool to see all the people talking about not just Gridcoin, but BOINC. We have one of our core developers is a BOINCer from the original SETI. He's been around for a long, long time. He's got many hours. I think he's like 300 and some odd in credits in the world. But yeah, so about me really quick, I'm an organizer in the community. I don't do code work. I don't do any of that. I do a lot of marketing and outreach. I do a podcast on Thursdays, so we have one tomorrow night, and we talk about Gridcoin, blockchain, cryptocurrencies. We try to introduce the concepts to people who might not be familiar with them, and we just try to bring the community into it as well. It's me and a couple other people that host it.
And we just had a community member step up, and he's now doing these things called the project briefs, where he talks about BOINC projects specifically for about 30 minutes at the beginning of each episode. So they're hour-long episodes. We've talked about SETI at home. We talked about Einstein at home. And tomorrow we're doing DHEP, which is really, really cool. We're excited to see that. This is contact, and that website right there is not really a website yet. I just use it to put up some documents that I think people might find useful. Right now it has a new version of the white paper, and it also has a link to a talk by this guy named Andreas Antonopoulos, and he explains what cryptocurrency is and what blockchain is very well. He explains it as an alternative form of money. And I'm sort of, a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is going to be taken from what I've learned from him over the years. Not directly, just watching hours of videos. And I guess that's another thing I've done. I wrote the original white paper, and I wrote an updated one with, of course, a team of people who are invaluable in this sort of stuff. All right, so we're going to get a little crazy, just to be fair. This is pie in the sky sort of stuff. We're talking about blockchains. We're talking about pretty big systems. So what you're going to need coming when you're just getting introduced to this sort of stuff, skepticism, which there's plenty of already. Ask questions. Don't believe anything tells you right off the bat. It is a new space that involves money. So you're going to run into some interesting characters, let's say. So ask questions constantly. Doubt people. And also patience. It took me about 1.5 years or 2 years to really start to understand the principles of blockchain technology and the potential of it, what it can do. But once you get it, at least from what I found, and once, when I introduce it to people, once they get it, they get it. It just becomes obvious because this is like similar to what the internet was in the 80s. So it's the new form of the internet as a way that some people approach it. So in that respect, you're going to need an open mind for sure. When you're asking these questions, if you hit a plateau, which you will hit, of like, okay, this technology cannot do what this person is describing, question it. It probably can't, but there might be, when people are like, we're redefining how banking works, we're getting rid of the banks. Oh, this technology is not going to get rid of the banks. So you can look a little further into it, see what some people have written on the subject. And these are people from all over the world, from institutions and from banks that have left banks to come into this technology. All right. So DLT, blockchain, and cryptocurrency. DLT stands for distributed ledger technology, of which blockchain is the first, and there are a couple other types of DLTs. And cryptocurrency is a result of this DLT technology or blockchain. So when you think about these sort of systems, the way I approach it is you think about the internet. What the internet did was it built the first open system, digital open system, where anyone could come in and innovate, build ideas, businesses, technology, culture. You didn't need to ask permission to build in this system, which is a lot of what we've been talking about with BOINC this year. If you have something you want to build in the BOINC ecosystem, you don't need to ask anyone to do it, build it. And if it catches on, it catches on. If it doesn't, well, it doesn't. Hopefully it catches on. You don't need to ask someone to build it. And then open source, the code and the organization model comes out of this internet principle of just come in and do it. People put their products, they built this stuff and they put it on the internet. People came, took their code and built it to fit their own needs. And from that, you get some pretty interesting stuff, including Linux, which runs the world, right? Besides personal computers, it runs the world. So when you have this system of open contribution to fit your own needs, you have people where the person doesn't need to ask permission to build something. You have people building stuff they want to build. They're not being brought into focus groups and this and that, and being like, their creativity is not being curtailed. So they're building stuff with passion. They're building stuff with soul, and it ends up creating really cool stuff. Again, like Linux. So from this open source code, this open source organization model, you get DLT, blockchain, and cryptocurrency. This technology could have been released as closed source. It could have been sold to a bank. It could have been released in a dozen different ways. They released it open source, and they said anyone can build it, change it, do whatever the hell they want with it. And that is one of the most amazing things that the Satoshi Nakamoto, the pseudonymous person that put this out, or group of people. It's one of the most amazing things they did for the world. They gave it to the world. So this is just the basic principle. No one needs to seek permission in order to participate, to run a node, to change the code, to build, or to innovate. That's key. Anyone can come in and innovate on this stuff. And they have. So innovate what? On a large scale, this is a lot of what I'm interested in, large systems. We're changing the way that human architecture works, the way that we interact with each other. So finance, governments, and information systems. Let's just see what I got next. So we're going to just go through them here. Information systems. All right, so a blockchain, or DLT, is simply a ledger of data. It is primarily used for, right now, transaction data. So it's to say, I have $5, I give it to you I give my $5 to you. That means I cannot go over and give you $5. Those $5 have been spent over there. I can't double spend those $5. That's primarily what the data in a blockchain is. But if you step out for a second, it's just data. You can put any type of data in the chain. Some of it is should probably not be put on a blockchain, but you can expand outside of just financial data. An example from Gridcoin is we put RAC on the blockchain, recent average credit, and then we use that data that's on a blockchain, has nothing to do with money, to calculate how many Gridcoin a cruncher should earn for their work. One example, we can do a lot more with data. That is only just starting to get explored in terms of people building in the system. Here are some examples. The contributions, accreditation, or reputation. You can build reputation systems on this blockchain technology, and people are working on it. It's very difficult. It is building technology protocols, just like the internet came out and it took years and years and years before it became a thing. Same stuff, but you can do this sort of stuff. Credit, so we were talking about with the climate prediction, where you give the cruncher the satisfaction of seeing what they've done. Well, you can put that sort of data on a blockchain where if an article is published, it automatically refers to the people that helped produce that data, that created the article ultimately. And then discourse, so it's just general information systems. Just communication, what the internet did. So you can have different fields of science communicating quicker together. You can just have scientists communicating more quickly. General discourse can get increased in efficiency with this sort of technology. Governance, this is a fun one. So where do you send a cease and desist letter for BOINC? You can't. You don't send it to anyone. There's no central control. There's no central authority to this stuff. So if someone sent a cease and desist letter to like Berkeley or something, okay, one of us forks the code and we put it up on a different repo, the software continues. That's kind of really cool. It's the same thing with Bitcoin. There is no cease and desist. There's no central authority to shut down. So you can see recently, like Libra, which is Facebook just put out their own white paper for cryptocurrency. And they got a cease and desist letter or some sort of request from the government saying, knock it off, you can't do this. And they just sent that letter to Facebook because it's a centralized authority. So when you have a permissionless blockchain, which is like Bitcoin, which is a system where anyone can participate, you have to still make decisions. So it operates under a basic open source model, but it adds this concept of network nodes running the software, because that's how you progress the blockchain, and that gets into some technicals. It's very difficult to explain really quickly. But basically, the contributors of the system argue vigorously, and that's by design, to decide which way they want to go. And someone who can create changes to the software creates the changes to the software. And then if those network nodes, the maintainers of the ledger, decide they like the new software, they'll download and run the new software. If they don't like it, they won't download and run the new software. It's the only way changes are made. And it results in rapid development, actually. Very fun to watch. This is just a quote from the new white paper, which is not an official white paper yet, so it hasn't been voted in or anything like that. But definitely check it out if you want to learn more about that. Yeah, that's enough for governments for now. Finance. So this is the original industry that Bitcoin sought to disrupt, was the fintech industry. So what has ended up happening is we now have three types of currency. If you look at currency as simply a technology, which it is, money is a technology, it has been a controlled technology for as long as any of us can remember, for sure, and much longer. It has been run by governments, and you cannot really mint your own currency. So that it was running completely closed systems. The people in control were those in the Federal Reserve or wherever you're from, the people in the government. So it's government guaranteed scarcity. The power to mint the currency is entrusted to the government or banks, whatever. We call that fiat. You can choose among different types of fiat. You got euros, you got US dollars, you got whatever. But largely you're going to choose based on where you live. If you live in the US, you're going to use US dollars. If you live in Europe, you're going to use euros. Then Bitcoin comes out. Skip number 2 for a second. Bitcoin comes out, and you have a permissionless DLT-based cryptocurrency. That's called the people's currency. It's not, the economic policies of Bitcoin is not controlled by any one person, any one entity, or anything. It's controlled by that. If there is an economic policy shift that people want, they have to argue for it. They have to convince all the nodes in the network, and nodes are simply people that maintain the ledger. You have to convince all those nodes that this new economic policy is for the better. That's very hard to do, probably impossible to do in Bitcoin. We've actually done it in Gridcoin a couple times because Gridcoin is what we call altcoin. We can talk about that later if you want, but we won't right here. All right, so you've got the fiat currencies, government guaranteed scarcity, people's currency, which is protocol guaranteed scarcity. It's run by a set of computer code. And then you have corporate issued currencies, Facebook and Libra currencies. And they're starting to do it. JP, you have the choice. You can support the government currency, you can support the corporate currency, you can support the people's currency. And one is probably better at a specific, support the people's currency. And one is probably better at a specific point in time than another one. And in different contexts. But the point is, let's say fiat collapses. Let's say government puts in hyperinflation policies where, use Greece and Venezuela, for example, where all of a sudden that fiat currency collapses. And before these two, everyone fails with that currency failing. They had nowhere to go. Now, when a fiat currency collapses because of one thing or another, you have a choice. You can jump into a different currency. So these can be fiat systems. So now a government is less likely to put in a hyperinflation policy because they understand that if they do it, 5 to 10% of their population is going to jump to a cryptocurrency, or maybe they're going to jump to Libra. So they'll be a little more cautious when it comes to putting in policies like that. All right, so if you have all these, this is only wall of text, I promise. When you have all these systems, all these different currencies, you have to, all of a sudden you have a choice of what network you want to support. And you have to ask questions in the same way you ask a business, you ask questions about what business you're going to support. Am I going to go to Walmart or Kmart? Probably bad examples for one another, but it's the same types of questions. So what does a cryptocurrency represent? Bitcoin, for example, represents computer cycles, essentially. But they're computer cycles used for a very specific task, which I'll not get into. Gridcoin represents computer cycles contributed to scientific computations on BOINC. There are other cryptocurrencies out there, and their currency represents different things. Some of them represent the same. Again, there are many of them. How does the protocol operate? So that's basically what are the economic policies in this economic system I want to participate in? How is the currency distributed? So Bitcoin is distributed to people who help secure the ledger. Gridcoin is distributed to people who help secure the ledger and people who contribute to BOINC. So that's pretty important when you compare that to fiat, and we'll get there a little bit later. What is the network's origin? History of the network, history of the company, same question. What are the network's features? Because these things are digital cash, digital networks, you can do a lot of different stuff with them. They're not just currencies, like I was sort of describing before. So What are the features? How many people contribute? Bitcoin is a big one and the reason it's likely not going away is because there are hundreds of developers that contribute to Bitcoin. There are dozens of institutions at least that contribute to Bitcoin. So that's why a lot of people love Bitcoin. Who supports the network? That's like partnerships and people involved. Who else uses the currencies? Where can you spend it? For example, there are BOINC projects that accept GRC for donations. What are the choices the network has made in the past? What are the choices it will likely to make in the future? That's like corporate responsibility. And what is the level of passion in the network? So because these are all open source currencies, open source economic models, you have to gauge the level of passion because passion drives this stuff. It's volunteer based with a twist, but I don't think I'll explain the twist today. All right, now we get to the science part. All right, so so what Bitcoin did, what blockchain did, is it opened up the financial systems for anyone to participate. It made it, as I described, a permissionless system. You can now innovate on an economic level without going to a government, without going to school, without doing anything. You just need to do it, build it. So let's think about the scientific systems. We can do the same thing with those systems. So who chooses what science is worthwhile? You have essentially boils down to where the money comes from, right? So a lot of this stuff is being built by people who are in the computer space, but not necessarily in the science space. In Gridcoin, we do have a lot of people who are like PhD students and actual practitioners and researchers. But ultimately, this boils down to the fact that anyone can now participate. So if you are a researcher, if you are a scientist, you have to think about what you would change in the system that you currently participate in. Because I'm pretty sure that no one thinks that the system is perfect. If you think any system is ever perfect, I don't know what to tell you. Everything can always be improved. So you now have the tools to improve the system, and these tools have never been really invented before. It's like someone just invented the hammer, and now they're going to build a different kind of house. So how is worthwhile science chosen? What if instead of a large company going out or a large government saying, I'm going to do your science, I'm going to do your science, what if it was people making the choices? What if researchers had to convince a large swath of people, a large network, that their science is valuable? What effects might that have on humanity as a whole? Information systems. How is discourse defined and maintained in the systems? So think about publication houses. Think about impact factors. Think about metadata. What if the way that your reputation was built was not controlled by a publication house, was not controlled by a school you work at? What if it was controlled by the actual amount of science you do? Who controls the public? Save that question. Talk at the end, because a big part of this is the discussion that goes on between it. So if that's the case, that's the case. But you have to think about how it could change if all of a sudden the system is opened. Right now, if you publish through a school, that means that anyone who doesn't go to a school can't publish. That seems weird. There's a lot of science that comes out of just citizen scientists. Let's talk. All right, funding systems. This is a big one. Where does money factor into this? I don't really want to get into it too much, but governments and companies choose it. What if funding came straight from an economic protocol? What if instead of money going to banks and then banks choosing where money goes after that, what if money went to scientists and scientists decide how money enters an economy? Where would scientists put money versus where would banks put money? And when you think about that, you end up tying in incentives and education. So if you as a scientist, as a researcher, have to convince a large network of people from all walks of life what science is worthwhile, what science you should incentivize directly from the protocol. And what that means is, let's say I mint $100,000 from an economic protocol, and I give 20% to crunchers, 20% to developers, 20% to researchers, and who knows what we do with the rest. I, as a researcher, now need to fight for that 20% of the $100,000 to get my research funded. When I do that, I have to now do it to a large network of people, normal people. All of a sudden, we have a cycle of education going on. I, as a researcher, have to educate the general population as to why my research is valuable. You as a me as a that's get there in a second. So that's the researcher coming out to educate people, and then to use Gridcoin as an example, a network has to choose what type of research they're going to incentivize. So we have this whitelist, where there's a list of projects that do get incentivized, and we have computation power to incentivize projects to want to be on the whitelist. Patrick pointed out that there has to be a lot more research done into whether or not that actually works, that model. I agree. It is very early in the system still, lots of work. But yes. But if that whitelist is part of my network, and my network then whitelists, for all intents and purposes, bogus science, the value of my network as viewed by someone on the outside has just decreased. So I am encouraged to educate myself on the value of the science, attempting to get incentivized directly from the protocol. So there's the two avenues of education: researcher reaching out, and the steward of the whitelist, for all intents and purposes, maintaining a level of science literacy to at least understand what's going on with these projects. And we see the results of a system that doesn't encourage education at that level in the US, at least, where we have very low science literacy levels. We have a low rate of people trusting scientists and the results of scientists. As bad things happen when you don't educate people at a layman level. And then you have direct incentives. So I already talked a little bit about this. We have a set number of GRC, and we send some of it to crunchy contributions to BOINC based on how much they contribute. And we send some of it to people who help secure the blockchain. Those can be expanded upon. I sort of alluded to it. You can send certain amounts of the currency minted by the protocol to development directly. You could send it to donations, like charitable initiatives. You can send it to anything you want, really. It just has to be agreed upon by the network. When you change the economic protocol, you have to have this merit-based argument where someone then implements a decision into code, and then the network nodes implement that code. And then we get to the idea of democratized incentives. That's exactly what I just described, the fact that everyone in the system now gets to choose what is incentivized. So Gridcoin has chosen to incentivize crunching contributions and securing the network. We used to send more money to securing the network than we do now, and that is because, well, we changed it because some people in the community said, let's incentivize crunching a little more, so we changed the economic model, and most people switched over. Almost everyone switched over. So that creates an incentive-based currency. And at the end of the day, Gridcoin's protocol and the technology that has been developed by some very, very smart developers lets us incentivize any leaderboard, because that's all whitelisted BOINC projects are. They're saying, we're accepting your leaderboard as valid. We trust you guys not to screw the data. If you screw with the data, you're off the whitelist. And we can do that with anything. So some ideas people are putting out there are, what if we incentivize nations or people in nations for based on their carbon footprint? There are leaderboards out there on which nation contributes more carbon versus less carbon. Let's use that one because actually this is already being done. So incentive-based currencies are new, and just to drive the point that this is, while I did say it was wishy-washy, sort of this technology could do all this stuff, it's here, it's doing it already. Belfast just implemented a local incentive-based currency where you get the currency based on whether or not you buy locally and whether or not you do environmentally positive activities. So that's an entire place just doing a currency with a cryptocurrency, and using a brand new technology, a brand new economic model to stimulate specific, or to incentivize people to do specific things. This is not just random people talking about random ideas. This is pretty real already. So when you're thinking, all of this, to tie it back in, is talking about permissionless systems of science. We're trying to build a system where anyone can participate in science, whether it's vetting the science, publishing a science article, doing research, getting funding, anything you want, anyone can participate. That would be great for science, in my opinion. It would really spread education. It would break a couple bubbles that exist in academia, which is those bubbles cause a little harm. So if you're struggling to get to the concepts, think about what the internet did. All of a sudden, anyone could innovate culture, business, technology, education, and it did some really cool stuff. We have the world we live in today because of what the internet did. And then compare that to the current scientific systems. What if we did what we did with the internet to the scientific systems? And then ask, what if X, Y, or Z? This is very new technology. If you go back to thinking about the internet, when it came out, people thought X, Y, and Z would happen, and then A, B, and C happened. Like, we had no idea. You can predict to a certain point, but things happened that no one could have predicted. And some are good, some are bad. The same stuff is going to happen here, but you're not going to build the stuff unless you're thinking, what could I do? What if I did this? What if I did that? And then if you have an idea on how your system that you participate in could change, come in to talk to someone who is experienced in this field and say, can I do this with blockchain tech? And they'll either say, no, that's not at all, get out of here. No one's at me. They won't tell you to get out of here. But they'll say yes or no. And if it's a good idea and someone wants to build it, they'll build it. It's pretty cool. And then just to bring in the theme that has been part of the theme this week, it seems, is just do it. Don't ask permission. You are participating, whether it's BOINC, blockchain, or whatever, you're participating in a permissionless system. That means permissionless. That means you don't need permission to go out and build something. The design talk earlier, it's a great idea. These guys just got together and it looks like you're just building a design style. That's awesome. Like, they didn't go to someone and say, hey, can I build this thing? They said, I built it. Here it is. Do you want to help me bring it to the next level? Do you want to help continue with this design process? That's exactly what it's about. And that's the fundamental principle that blockchain is built on. And we want to bring that into science, where you don't need to ask an institution for funding or for the tools and the resources to get something done. So that, I think, is the end of it. Again, I'll be updating this website semi-regularly until we turn it into a real website. If we ever turn it into a real website, basically it's just a URL I hold, so I just put files up there. But if you are very curious about this stuff, watch the video that I put up there by Andreas Antonopoulos, and feel free to go down a rabbit hole. He's a very good talker. And get involved. Join us. You can join Discord, the Gridcoin Discord, Slack, whatever. You know, open system. Do what you want to do. All right. I think I did 20 minutes. 30?
Blockchain was a scam.
Get out. Don't you work at that? Is that a real question? I'll comment on it. If it was how? Like, okay, some people say it's been through, it's a huge bubble, it's a pump and dump. It's been around since 2008/2009. It's gone through 8 giant bubbles. Well, it depends on your perspective. Between 4 and 8 bubbles. And every time it goes up, comes down, baselines, and it's adoption. It's a very new technology. If it was a scam, my guess would be over by now, because that's a long time to run a scam. Yeah, I would like to hear your thoughts, John. Yeah, so the question is, how many people are in the community, and do we already have the infrastructure to do everything? So we have about 13,000 people incentivized with Gridcoin. The community is larger because some people join the community because they're really interested in cryptocurrency, but they don't necessarily contribute to crunching. And that is valuable because we're an economic model. So when you support the currency, when you use the currency in day-to-day life, which you can't really do with cryptocurrency period right now, but at some point, what you're doing is you're making the GRC that we use to incentivize crunchers more valuable, and that in turn incentivizes more crunching. but so that's the number we have. The way to get involved is, I forget if, Patrick, you did bring this up. It's more, it adds another layer to it, so it's a little more complicated. But at the same time, you know, BOINC itself is pretty complicated too. So we have the fact that we have such an engaged community. We have people who have never participated in BOINC, but they're crypto nerds, and they come in and they're like, oh, I've never used BOINC before. How do I set this up? We have a huge community that helps them set it up, helps them find the right project for their hardware, helps them optimize their stuff, and then helps them set up the GridCoin system on top. And at the end of the day, the GridCoin system isn't too much of a step, but it should be simplified, will be simplified. We have a huge bounty out for getting it simplified for a developer to come in and actually build a new GUI. And just to add on to that, another thing we contribute to BOINC is we have a very, very dedicated developer team, and just developers, coders, people who develop software, engineer really cool stuff in the community. We have someone who has developed a BOINC operating system. We have on the developer list, actually that was brought up earlier, one of the people on there is a core developer for GridCoin. We have people who have attended these workshops before. We have people who continuously contribute code. And as we develop the GridCoin code, they say, I now want to work on BOINC because we've hit a wall with what we can do based on what BOINC's code is. And they are like, all right, what can we come into what can we take from GridCoin, bring to BOINC, and change the code and improve things? So it's large participation base and also developer base for BOINC. Yeah. Any others? Oh, sorry.
I've never got into the cryptocurrency side of things. I've essentially thought about the public image of Bitcoin, so more about that, not about GridCoin.
Right.
I think I have two conflicting images in my mind. One is that Bitcoin is a transactional system. Means I can walk into a Starbucks in any city in the world, means to say, well, it's buy a cup of coffee, do away with the currency traders and their commission on foreign exchange, all of that sort of thing. And it is a used transactional system. That's one thing. The other thing is I keep getting a good pocket alongside my webmail or my laptop saying, get into Bitcoin and make $1 million. It's capital appreciation.
Yeah.
Somebody's making those adverts, by the way. Is there a conversation within the crypto world?
Oh, yes.
About the challenge between transaction and asset growth?
So this goes back to John's earlier question, is Bitcoin a scam, right? So the comment was basically, I understand Bitcoin as a transaction tool for transaction, but I also get a bunch of ads that tell me to buy Bitcoin and get really rich. So it's the creation of a whole new type of currency. So it's going to appreciate in value. It's called digital gold. So you cannot separate the idea of money and an investment vehicle from it. But the people who develop this stuff, Andreas Antonopoulos is a great example of this. He has been in the space forever, and he has done some great things in terms of communication. He will not talk about the price of Bitcoin. He doesn't do it. And the people who develop it don't really talk about the price. It's always, it's exciting when price goes up, and because when price goes up, it means there's a huge wave of adoption coming. And we all love this technology in terms of a currency because of what it can do for power structures. So that's why I say be skeptical in the beginning, because there are people out there who want to make money, and particularly who want to take your money. But if you get into the space, if you can get past that and not just listen to information that's fed to you, if you seek out your own information, you're going to find people who are definitely in this space for the right reason, which is freedom. We want to give people monetary freedom, the ability to access banking tools that were previously not accessible. That when you give people access to banking, and this is outside of the Western world, because we all generally have access to banking, but in other countries, they don't. When you give people access to taking out loans, they're able to grow wealth that what they couldn't do before. They couldn't bank. So and that's just the tip of the iceberg. It's so easy to go too deep in it. So it's difficult too, but you have to seek out your own information and find people to trust. Don't just read those advertisements and take them at face value. That would be my advice, because you are right. There's two levels to it, because it's inevitable. It has to do with money.
So I suppose an interesting one, this is a quite nice crossover between two areas of my research, because of course cryptocurrency mining is the largest source of energy in the world. Because basically,
Nice choice of phrasing.
and one of the ways actually that IT equipment is one of the largest contributors to climate change, because basically burn huge amounts of energy for seemingly pointless reasons. And from that point of view, the consequences are severe. From that point of view, the one good thing I suppose you could say about Bitcoin, at least we're doing some science with it alongside.
Right.
From that point of view, if you talk, you'll kind of see it, but actually you really understand the consequences.
So the question is about the energy consumption of Bitcoin, coming from the perspective of this thing uses a lot of energy for no purpose. So when you create an economic system based on this, you're going to incentivize people to develop a technology to make it not bad. That's what has happened in history. When you discover a new thing, you find a way to maximize efficiency. So people who support this technology generally are aware of climate change, very aware, and aware of how much energy it uses. There are a lot of people in Gridcoin who see Gridcoin as better than Bitcoin for exactly your reason. We're using this energy for science. But at the end of the day, we're going to, the acceleration of use of energy creates an acceleration in investment in alternatives. So Bitcoin miners go places, and maybe it's energy theft, but they go places where there's renewable energy to use that energy instead of coal plants, or they go where there's cheap energy. And it creates more economic models because, or it creates a different ecosystem because we're now using this energy to create an economic model, to create a whole economic system around it. So it's a complex scenario. It's not just people running computers to make money. They're running computers to do a very valuable service, which is secure a ledger. Securing a ledger?
It is in comparison to other things that energy can be used. Energy is a finite resource. So one of the things, money is effective because governments can always get money. Energy is a finite resource.
So let's tie currency to it.
Well, absolutely. Let's actually do something useful rather than run IT with it. Let's do things something more convenient.
Part of that is the proof of work. So the algorithm we set up to make the mining more difficult and really to provide more security, but then they actually lead up to very intensive capital and significant energy consumption is just together the Bitcoin because of the price appreciation that people will get compensated by doing so. Well, I think if we have a project, for example, how we limit so Bitcoin is just a starting point of technology. Blockchain is not a representative of all the so unfortunately, the volatility of the cryptocurrency market and speculation behavior create a lot of skepticism in terms of how we can engage more the audience when they utilize it as an asset instead of just
It was really well said.
Guys. We are so over.
Okay, last comment. So you're talking about proof of work and Gridcoin, for example. There are other consensus models. Gridcoin uses proof of stake, which requires essentially zero energy to secure the ledger. So there are other alternatives being explored. Blah, 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 blah. Thank you.
I'm going to come tomorrow with a big cane. And I'm going to cane you guys off here. Please, I can do discussions, but to try and stay on time and be fair to every other presenter and everybody's time after this, we have to keep on moving. We're going to cut our next break from 30 minutes to 15 So we're gonna start at 3:15 with the next set of speakers. Kevin, you have a question?
I comment. One thing to tell you now is that tomorrow is the Hackfest day, and the purpose of that day is for all of these rich discussion topics to be discussed ad nauseum. And so clearly this discussion, if we choose to have it, it will be one that can continue tomorrow and look at ways of discussing how we can do things with it. So keep that in mind. We'll be talking about which sessions we're going to do tomorrow. That's going to be based upon all of these discussions that have had to be drawn to an early close. Can be continued tomorrow.
And
so that's the purpose of tomorrow.
that's also the purpose of this parking lot. If there is a topic that you want to continue discussion on, make sure you write it down and stick it up there so it gets to be picked for these hackathons. So yes, we're going to break until 3:15, and then we will hear from Max and Alex.